Okay, we're on page 266 in the Kuzari. We are talking about the definition of what a saintly person is, what a chassid is. A chassid, a saintly person in the medieval world, is a person who, according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, is able to take control over all of the internal struggles that are contained within him. There are so many different voices that are inside of us. And a righteous person, a saintly person, is someone who's able to bring everything under control and channel everything towards one focus, which is the service of Hashem. So I take my tendency towards anger, and I use it in the service of Hashem. I take my tendency towards laziness, and I use it in the service of Hashem. I take my tendency towards greed, and I use it in the service of Hashem. How can I do all of those things? It seems difficult, right? But first of all, it would be necessary for us to identify who we are in life. What are my personality traits? What kind of tendencies do I have? The only way that I can actually take control of all of the conflicting voices inside of me is if I know what the voices are, if I'm really in touch with myself. So let's see what he says in the beginning of paragraph 2. He says, he muzzles his physical desires and prevents them from intensifying by feeding them their due and providing them enough to satisfy their needs. That's what we had seen last time. You want to be able to curtail your hearty appetite. Don't starve. That'll be a failure because you just end up breaking the diet. He accomplishes this by eating and drinking sufficient amounts, all in moderation. He also bathes and grooms himself moderately. What do we mean by moderately? In other words, I'm not spending an hour every morning in front of the bathroom mirror, right, to make sure that every single hair is in place. But I'm not going to look like a schlub either. I'm going to make sure that I'm clean. My hair is combed at least a little bit. But I'm not going to, that's the idea of moderation, okay? So therefore there's a tendency towards vanity that we all have. But there's a tendency towards laziness. You know, they say a story about a great rabbi that he woke up and he was in the middle of the night and he was really, really thirsty. So he said, should I get up out of bed, get a glass of water? Should I not get a glass of water? And he was thinking to himself, if I get up and get the glass of water, so that I'm giving in to my tendency to want to just feed my thirst, right? Because the truth is, if I went back to sleep, I'd be okay. And maybe I'm just being indulgent by getting up and getting the glass of water. But if I don't get out of bed, then maybe I'm just because I'm lazy and I just don't want to get out of bed because I don't want to get my feet on the cold floor. So he's debating with himself, which tendency should I conquer? Right? Should I conquer my tendency towards not wanting to get out of bed or my tendency towards thirst? So he decided that he got out of bed, filled up the glass of water, poured it out, went back to bed. So this was the way of him demonstrating his absolute control over his desires. So he also muzzles those aggressive tendencies which seek to vanquish other people. You know, within every one of us, that's one of the reasons why the Talmud tells us the Mishnah tells us, pray for the security of the kingdom. Pray for the government. You know why you have to pray for the government? Because if it weren't for governmental authorities, we would be swallowing each other whole, alive. Ish esre'ehu chayim bila'o. We would all swallow each other alive, which is actually why halachically there's a mandate to say a prayer for the government every Shabbos. It's based on that Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. You have to pray for the welfare of the government because otherwise when there's anarchy, there'll be a total breakdown because people will just demolish the other. And you and I also share that. Without there being proper restraints that are placed on us, proper disincentives to just totally swallow someone else up, we also would be much more aggressive than we are. It's socially unacceptable. We stand so much to lose if we are more aggressive. But yet we all recognize that there's a certain aggressiveness within each and every one of us. Even the most gentle and polite Canadian has aggression within them. And it's something that we have to remember is that, so what do? I can't just totally suppress it, but I have to be able to channel it into the proper direction. So instead of just, beating up my younger sibling or, lashing out physically, I enter into polite disputation with someone with whom I disagree, and therefore I'm able to get out a certain aggressive tendency of being able to vanquish the enemy. Yes? So that's he feeds those tendencies their due in a productive fashion by defeating others in scholarly and philosophical debates and by rebuking evil people. And this is the part that I wanted to take a look at with you today, utilizing one's God-given tendencies for the good. And of course, this is such an important exercise that at some point in life, people have to sort of recognize, all right, this is who I am. There are that doesn't mean that you can't change. A lot of times we can condition our tendencies towards one direction or another. We can suppress certain tendencies. We can lighten certain tendencies to make them less prominent in their appearance. But ultimately, we are who we are. And we have to appreciate that we are who we are. And at some point, you have to say, okay, this is me. This is my personality. This is who I am. Now, how am I going to make the best of this and be the best possible me that I can possibly be? And Chazal were very cognizant of this idea, and they phrase this in terms of astrology. Our Chazal tell us that everyone was born under a certain mazal. Everyone was born under a certain astrological configuration. And that astrological configuration really helped to contribute who the type of person that you would grow up to be. All of the tendencies that you have, yes?
Does it correspond to at all, to the astrological things that the Goyim do?
No, it doesn't, because it's a good question. It doesn't seem to. It doesn't seem to. Because the way that the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, which we'll see in a second, describes it, is that it doesn't really matter what day you're born, it really matters what hour you're born, because each hour of the day has a different astrological configuration. So it's much more sophisticated. Now, our sages do acknowledge the monthly astrological forecast does contribute something, but more on a national level. That's why we say that Mishenichnas Av Mema'atin B'Simcha, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. That when the month of Av arrives, we have to minimize our joy, and not only minimize our joy, but also realize that the mazel for the Jewish people in the month of Av is non-propitious, and in the month of Adar, the mazel of Adar is propitious for the Jewish people. So we do believe in an overarching monthly astrological shift, but it becomes clear from the context that in this discussion, it really depends on what hour you're born in the day. Okay, so the Gemara, and in source number 1, this is just a snippet from a larger piece of Gemara. The Talmud discusses that depending upon what star you're born under will determine your personality traits. And whether or not we subscribe absolutely to this astrological forecast is really not relevant. The purpose of this exercise is to realize that Chazal were very cognizant of the fact that every single human being is born with a unique set of personality traits that are unique to that individual, and that a person has an obligation to try and recognize and identify what they are, what set of traits, what set of tendencies I possess. So the Gemara says, as an example, Hai man de b'madim yehi gever ashid dama. If a person is born under the astrological forecast of Mars, which is the red star, then he will be a shedder of blood. That person will have a tendency to be towards shedding blood. And the Gemara therefore says, Omer Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi says that he'll have a choice in life. I umna, I ganava, I tabacha. He can choose to either be a moyal, or he can be a ganaf, who kills people on the road, or like a member of the mafia, or he can be a shoichet. Now, what are these three things descriptive of? They're descriptive of three occupations that shed blood for a living. One sheds blood in the course of doing a mitzvah. One sheds blood in the course of doing a terrible avera by beating up people and killing them when necessary, knocking them off, rubbing them out, whatever they say, right? And then the third person really is sort of doing a mitzvah, but it's really more of a reshut because no one needs to eat meat. So therefore it's considered to be sort of in between those two. It's sort of, it's a living. Amar Rabba, Ana b'madim havai. So Rabba says, I don't get it. I was born under that constellation of Mars, and I'm not a bloodshedder. So how does it work? So the response to him was that Abaya said to him, Mar nami anish v'katil. No, Rebbe, you are a bloodshedder, because when someone comes up against you, you really know how to knock them down. In other words, you have the same aggressive personality trait as everyone else that's born under that constellation. You're not literally shedding their blood, but you certainly know how to get back at someone very, very aggressively. Possibly in the Beis Medrash is what they were referring to. In other words, when someone comes up to you and challenges something you say as a rabbinic ruling, you are very, very quick to smite them in the theater of the Talmudic disputation. And so basically, that's what the Gemara is basically suggesting is that if you were born with that certain tendency towards aggression and violence, if you become a librarian, then one day someone's going to bring back an overdue book, and you're just going to totally lose it. I mean, it's something's going to go awry. Yeah, you're going to snap. You're going to go, as I say, you're going to go postal, right? It's right. Yes, go ahead.
Why do the rabbis even couch this tendency in the language of being born at a certain time? Why don't they just say, why don't they lose the whole astrological thing and say, if Hashem created you with this tendency? Because I feel it's misleading. It's almost saying, like, if you happen to be born in this month at this time, then you will have these traits. Why not just say, if Hashem created you with these traits?
Well, it's a very good question. I think the answer to the question is that Chazal view the mazalot as really divine intermediaries. Hashem, really essentially, Chazal are saying that. Hashem decides when and under what circumstances you're going to be born. It is ultimately Hashem who choreographed that you would be born at a particular hour under that particular constellation. But what are the means that God employs in order to give you those character traits? It is He uses the mazalot as the means.
Right, I just feel like it is very open to misinterpretation when you
Perhaps
say it
it
that
is.
way.
I think that it's better understood in a medieval or ancient context where people understood that God controls the mazalot and He uses them as His employees, so to speak, as His intermediary forces. Okay, and so based on this, many of the commentaries understand the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot as telling us that exact thing. Rabbi Akiva was quoted as saying in source number 2, "Hakol tzafui v'harishut netuna." Everything is forecast, but man still has free will. Everything is forecast, but man still has free will. So how do you reconcile that if everything is forecast, or everything is preordained, or everything is pre-known by Hashem? So one of the ways to reconcile that is that Hashem has already ordained from the time of your birth what tendencies you'll have. Some people have a tendency towards aggression. Other people have a tendency towards sloth and passivity. And those are neutral traits, is essentially what the Mishnah is telling us. Hashem gave you what He gave you, and it's really now up to you to decide how you would like to utilize those traits. We have a similar principle. We're not going to go through the whole commentary of Rav Tzemach Duran, but that's essentially what the way he explains it.
But somebody could have a passive personality or be very kind and gentle, and let's say they're born, World War II breaks out. And suddenly you're not going to survive if you're kind and gentle, and you have to become, very strong and aggressive.
Right, there are times, you're absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, the commentaries say that this is why Akedas Yitzchak the binding of Isaac was the most difficult test for Abraham. Because his tendency was to the exact opposite extreme of violence. He was a man of kindness. He was the one who welcomed everyone into his home, friend or foe, right? Whether the person was a frum person or whether they were a total idolater. He said, my tent is open for you. Everyone come in. And now he's expected to do this extreme act of violence to his own child whom he loves so much. A person of pure emotion now has to do something which is so contrary to himself. There are times when Hashem calls upon us to do that. But those points of those experiences in life are very far and few in between. On a daily basis, a person has to recognize what my tendency is and how I channel it in the proper direction. Yes?
I'm just saying, like, sometimes environmental or circumstantial situations.
But those are also sent. Those are also sent by God. We believe everything from a fatalistic standpoint. That too was directed to you by God.
So that's where the choice comes in.
Yeah, right. And free choice comes in deciding how I'm going to channel, not only in those unusual circumstances where I have to go against my nature, but also on the day-to-day basis when I have to work with what I am. This is what God gave me. Okay, so what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it now? So it's not realistic to expect a person who's given to gentleness and passivity to be constantly aggressive. And a person has to know that I shouldn't be getting into a profession where I have, if I'm very shy by nature, I should not be getting into a profession which obligates me to be outgoing, right? And, be on the stage all the time, so to speak, right? Like I know, for example, I'm an abysmal failure at sales, right? I know it because I try telemarketing for a day, and I couldn't sell. What's that phrase? I couldn't sell snow. If you're a good salesman, you can sell snow to an Eskimo, but refrigerators to Eskimos. But I couldn't sell I couldn't sell a heater to an Eskimo. I mean, I couldn't do anything. So for whatever reason, like my sales pitch was, you don't really want to buy anything today, do you? So if I tried to go into sales, I might be able to counter that tendency.
But you're
right?
selling Torah to everyone.
That's true. So maybe I've channeled that, whatever, I don't know, whatever that tendency is, maybe I've channeled it right.
Something
Right.
you believe in, something
Right.
you're.
So when you believe in your product, you can
Passionate
sell it,
about
yeah.
it.
Well, anyway,
Rabbi,
yes.
just really quickly. So the thing is, there's also, like, you're not always in control of that, because when you're brought up from a child, like, there's this doctor that wrote a book, and they analyzed, like, people who were, like, psychopathic mass murderers or something like that. And they found that there was, like, an abnormality in their brain, like, there was a certain commonality. And then he actually had undergone something to check his brain, and they found that he
The
had
same
that,
thing.
that same thing. So he
Mhm.
actually wrote a book about this, and he was saying that if he hadn't been brought up in a very nurturing, encouraging environment by his parents, loving environment, who knows how he would have turned out.
Excellent. And so I want to get to that in a minute, because we have to affirm that every human being has free will. So even if you're born with a sociopathic tendency, right, we have to believe that at some point everyone has free will to control how I channel that either to the good or to the evil. I'm going to get to that in just a second. Just give me 1 second. The only thing I do want to extract from the Magen Avot commentary, that's Rav Shlomo or Shimon ben Semach Duran, is that he says, in the last 4 lines, he says, Ulefi zeh amru beper kol hayad. The Talmud also says in another place, Shehakadosh Baruch Hu gozer al hatipa, that Hashem preordains on the sort of the embryonic fluid that is being created and will eventually become a human being at the time, right shortly after the child, the embryo is conceived, Shehiyeh ashir o ani, gibor o chalash, chacham o tipesh. It's preordained whether a person will be wealthy or poor, because that's something you're born into. It will be preordained whether you're going to be physically strong or physically weak, your physical constitution. And your intellectual constitution will also be preordained whether you'll be very intelligent or not so intelligent. Shekol zeh lefi koach hatipa. Because that's all according to the chemical makeup of the embryo that is created. Aval sheyeh tzadiko rasha eino gozer aleh. But God does not decree whether you'll be a righteous or evil person. Because everything is preordained from heaven as far as your constitution, except for the fear of heaven. And therefore you find, and this goes to your point, Linda, you find in the Medrash says like this: when Esav was born, here's the famous question: was Esav born as an evil child? Was he a bad seed? And if he was, then why does he deserve to be treated so harshly? It's not his fault that he was created this way. It does seem certainly that way, that when he was born, the Torah says he was ruddy, he was hairy, he already had that propensity towards aggression and violence. So why should we blame him for that? And so the Medrash even points this out. It says Admoni, in source number 4. Admoni is the word for ruddy, that the Torah describes that Esav came out ruddy with his propensity towards bloodiness. At least that's the view of this medieval text. Amar Rabbi Abba bar Kahana ki ilu shofech damim. It appeared as if he was predestined to be a shedder of blood. The Kaven Shera'a Shmuel et David Admoni. Now, when the prophet Samuel first met David, when he was still a lad, and he had not yet become the king, the prophet Samuel was filled with fear, because he saw the same physical characteristics that Esav possessed within David. And he said, Dichtiv vayishlach vayiviehu v'hu admoni, that Samuel called for David to come. This is, right before the war with Goliath. And he sees that he's a ruddy individual. Some understand it means his skin was ruddy. Some understand that it means his hair was red. But either way, red hair, you see, you gotta be careful, because you don't mess with a red-haired person, because you never know what's going to happen. They could be fiery. So nityare. So immediately he became scared. Va'amar af ze shofech damim ke'esav. And he said, "Oh no, this person is going to be a bloodshedder just like Esav. What am I doing dealing with him?" And so what was the response? So Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, im yefei einayim. The pasuk describes him as Admoni im yefei einayim, that he was ruddy, but he also had beautiful eyes. So what does that second phrase connote? Esav midas atzmahu horeg, aval zeh midas Sanhedrin hu horeg. That the beautiful eyes of David were indicative of the fact that yes, he's going to be a shedder of blood. That's what the redness in him indicates. But he's going to do it with a discerning eye. He'll do it under the aegis of the Sanhedrin. And therefore, yes, it's true. Will David kill a lot of people? Absolutely. We know that one of the reasons our sages tell us that King David could not build the temple is because his hands were bloodied with warfare and with political executions. We know that. But those were justified. Those were under the rule of law. Those were just executions. And therefore, he fulfilled his destiny of being a shedder of blood, but at the same time did it in a righteous manner. And that's why King David, although he was a shedder of blood, was nonetheless a righteous man. So you therefore see, and there are a lot of very important lessons that we're supposed to take out of this. One, as we've already mentioned, that a person, know thyself, know who you are, know what your tendencies are, and use those tendencies and channel them only for the good. And no matter what your tendency may be, you may say to yourself, I'm so lazy, right? So, okay, so you're a little bit lazier than other people. You know what that means? It means the next time a group of friends want to get up and go somewhere that you know is inappropriate, you'll use your trait of laziness to say, it's okay, you guys, you go ahead and without me, right? So sometimes you can use the trait of laziness for something positive. Or, if you have an aggression, if you have a tendency towards aggression, like he said over here, you have aggressive tendencies, use them to vanquish the enemies of Judaism and, become a spokesperson for the state of Israel. And, you want to fight the evil media war, right? The propaganda that's being said about Israel. Become at the forefront of a movement to defend the Jewish people and become aggressive in that fashion. I think what's so important is that, especially us as parents, have an obligation to recognize who our children are. That's why Shlomo says, Chanoch lanar al pi darko. Educate a child according to his or her way. If we don't know the tendencies of our children, then we're not going to know how to direct them in the proper direction. Each one of our children has a different propensity and a different tendency. Sometimes two siblings grow up in the exact same family and they couldn't be more opposite from each other. You say, did you come from the same mother? Right? Sometimes it's like impossible to even tell that they're brother and sister because they're so different from each other in their personalities. One is vivacious and outgoing, and the other one is introverted and shy. So how do you channel those two? So if I treat them exactly the same, then I'm doing a disservice to both of them. Right? I have to know what the tendency of the child is and use that child's strengths in order to direct them. Yes?
Can your Hebrew name influence your character traits also?
I think it's just the opposite. I think the opposite is true. I think, our sages tell us that a person's Hebrew name is chosen with prophecy. In other words, God gives a person prophetic knowledge to choose the name of their child. So if anything, the name sort of is descriptive in some way of what that person is. And that's why Hashem gave you the wisdom to choose that name. Could it be that it also affects the other way? Maybe it could on some metaphysical level, I'm not sure. Okay, anything else? Okay. Let's go on. We'll hold it here for today. I think we've said enough on this subject, and let's talk about the Parsha for today.